Ben Wood, he grew up as a pastor's kid, and early on, he thought he was going to be a marriage and family counselor, or in sports world, doing something with basketball, which is one of his wildest dreams, playing basketball professionally. And then fast forward to college at Azusa Pacific University, and both were somewhat in play. He was redshirting from the basketball team, and then he was in the undergrad research group. In the next 4 years, basketball dropped off as he was cut from the team, but he doubled down in psychology, leaving college to work as a case manager, ABA specialist in Boston at the Franciscan Children's Hospital, and then enrolled in a clinical psych program at the Cal State Fullerton. In the first year, Ben ran into clinical ethics class that changed his vocational path. He quickly learned this wasn't where his passions was, plus skills aligned. So then he took an intro to organizational psychology course and then did his thesis with Ron Brigio. I'm hoping I'm saying that right, at Claremont McKenna on developing tolerance of nepotism scale. That sounds interesting. And then from there, Ben got into Hofstra University, had to take 1 year off for prereqs, and then went on to New York City, where he thought he was going to be in corporate strategic HR. He had several opportunities to join PepsiCo, Johnson & Johnson, and BlackRock. Instead, he began adjuncting at New York State schools, and from there, that sealed his further direction. Ben got into teaching and hasn't looked back. He has 3 full-time gigs at Liberty University, Simpson University, and currently at Vanguard University, where he is the program director of a professional and master's program in IO psychology program. And this program prepares students to land strategic HR positions in mid to large corporations. Ben has also adjuncted at Bellevue University and Azusa Pacific University, his alma mater. And Ben has also started his own recruiting company to place students into open youth pastors position in churches. Ben loves his vocational flexibility in life, but he is truly a family first person and lives to be with his wife and 4 children, Brady 6, Olivia 5, Judah 3, and Kate 1. And Ben is super happy he found organizational psych so that he could also live the life he always dreamed of with his kids. So pretty awesome introduction. Ben, please give us wisdom, guidance, everything you got.
Sure. So I tried to do that to hopefully give most of you hope that it doesn't work out the way you think it does, but the way it does work out is better than you could ever imagine. Um, as you could hear in my journey so far, I pivoted like 4 or 5 times. And I found work psych and I love it and it's awesome. And there's a lot of different ways you can go in org psych. I think the advantage of for you to really know, I already a couple questions, what do I do? Where do I go? For you to know that, I think you really have to understand org psych. Everything you have to understand, what is our application? Who is it that we are? What is our value proposition? And what differentiates us in the market? So the way I like to describe IO psychology is we apply the scientific method at work to solve people-related problems. So there's 2 main areas that we really thrive in. We kind of are like an auto mechanic for a company because we can figure out problems with our critical thinking or applying the scientific method. That's number 1. So we troubleshoot. Number 2, we have a huge theoretical evidential framework that once we do identify the problem, we can intervene to fix the problem. So I'll give you a very common, this is probably the most familiar thing that you would do as a consultant. So I like to think of us as consultants because consultants solve problems. So either you are hired internally for a large company in which you're going to solve problems within a specific function of their large HR corporation. And typically, think what's hard to really understand IO is it's really mostly practiced in corporations where the ROI makes sense. So you're investing all this extra money in people, you really would do that if you're going to get a return out of it. And when you have 20,000, 40,000, 60,000, Amazon, 1.6 million employees, if you found the right ones, you want to keep them and you want to keep them moving up the career path and being more invested and having more influence and not having to hire always external. You want to keep building internal if you have the right people. So the way that it works is the C-suite typically looks at some data and they make some assumptions about the data. They think something's going on. They say, a common one would be turnover. They have all these sites and there's this one site that has a bunch of turnover going on. And so they think because it's a lot of turnover in that site that there's something wrong with the site. So you look at the data, you look at all the sites, you figure out that the rate of turnover across all the sites is about the same. The reason that there's more turnover is because at the site they've identified, there's more people. So that matters that you figured that out, because that your intervention would drastically different if it's a process related issue versus a behavioral related issue. If it's a process related issue, you fix turnover at that site, or if it needs to be fixed, then you could increase turnover at every site. But if there was something to that site that was problematic, it was a bad boss, dysfunctional teams, there was something about that site that needed to be intervened. If you just did a regular process fix, then that site would still be bleeding people unnecessarily. Does that make sense? So that skill set, you have to be able to show an employer that you can do that you're a diagnostic, you're a technician, this is why it's funny, but there's a lot of crossover from clinical psychology. It's very different, the scope of what we do, but we're like them. We meet with a person, we meet with a company, we go group, org, individual. They mostly stick with individuals. But we both diagnose. We have someone in front of us that has an issue. We have to solve it. And there's no way that you can solve an issue with an intervention if you don't really know what the problem is. And if you don't really know how to figure out what the problem is, you'll never solve it. So that's what gives us a competitive advantage in the marketplace, is that we have the tools to actually figure out, we actually know how to pinpoint where is this breaking down for this organization. That makes sense? And our major skill set, which turns most students off, especially I'm a director of a program, it's never sexy to say, hey, come to my program, you're going to get, 17 hours, 17 credits of stats and research methods. They're like, screw you, I'd rather, go do sports management or something. Okay, but, if you don't have that skill set, you're really never going to be able to solve a problem. So when you get that data set, you got to know some Excel. You got to be able to do some basic Excel functions. You got to look at that data and you got to be able to do some basic manipulations. I'm not talking high tech. We'll get into what it would look like to be a data analyst. We can get down that road, but that's not what I'm talking about here. I would say there's some basic competencies that our practitioners have that are not specialty tracks. It's like, if it's just a core identity of our field, you understand what a construct is. You understand what a good measurement of a construct is. You understand some basic psychometric properties. So we're dealing with that all the time. People want to know, I mean, you might seem like you have super magical powers if you walk in an organization and you let them know that extroversion is a higher order facet and it actually has sub factors to it. They won't know what you mean, but they'll be blown away if you actually tell them that you could hire an introvert to be a salesperson and they could be effective at that. I ask that question to my undergrads every semester, and I get half the class that say I would never hire an introvert salesperson, and I ask why, and they don't know. And if you look at the meta-analysis on that, there's actually, of the 7 subdimensions of extroversion, there's like 4, I think there's 2 of them that are actually negative as sales function, and there are a couple on the introversion scale that are positive. So that's really important that you understand those things, because when you go talk to leaders about, oh, you care about engagement, you care about satisfaction, you care about performance, they don't know how those things operate. Performance is very complicated, but we do. And that's great if we know how to talk about it, if we know how to talk their language, if we know how to connect with them to solve their problem. So that's the number one thing. You have to be really a clinician in a sense. You got to be a diagnostic you have to have diagnostic capability. And that goes around understanding constructs, understanding scales, understanding Excel stats, and basic research design. You have to know basic research design. How do you answer a question if you don't know the process to answer a question? If you set up, how'd you collect that data? How do you know that we have, groups that are that we're not going to have a problem with, understanding these groups because they weren't randomly assigned? Probably are always going to be dealing with some sort of quasi-experimental design. Do you know how to rule out threats to internal validity? Or do you know how to kind of capture those or what those are? If you don't know kind of those basic things as an IO practitioner, it's going to be really hard for you or for I to stand out against the competition because our competitors don't know any of that either. And that's what really gives us a leg up. So being able to pinpoint a problem with that applied scientific acumen. And then the beauty is, since you know applied scientific methods and acumen, you know how to read research articles and you know how to take the results discussion section and you know how to apply them to then fix the problem. So that is us in a nutshell. That is what makes us valuable. That is hopefully what you learn how to do from your grad program. I know as being a director that typically you don't learn those things because your aim typically is to finish your thesis, to finish your dissertation, whatever those, and those are very scientific ways of doing. That's a weird way of saying it, but they're very rigorous in their scientific method, and we have to be a little bit more flexible, not costing not costing the value or not costing validity to it, but we have to be a little more flexible in understanding that we don't have all of the levers and all of the processes that scientists do to create, causal relationships. So our data is a lot more messy. Our methods, our groups are a lot different. You're going to go into an organization and say, hey, we got this group in Chicago, group in Detroit. Tell us which one's more effective. Well, a lot of problems with that because we don't have the right group assignment. So you have to be able to rule some things out there. So does that make sense to everyone? So I hope that when you think about yourself as an IO practitioner, that's how you think of yourself. I think that's a good framework to think of as an IO practitioner. How you decide. So this is how I do it in my program. I have 3 legs to my master's. I have 3 sections of my master's program. And number 1 is that Captain America, has that thing in his heart. It's placing IO like deep into your DNA. I'm placing that to do all those things we just talked about. But the second thing is that as a person that has not had corporate experience, or you're in an internship, or you're doing entry level things, you are not going to be the IO practitioner right off the bat. You're going to work under an IO practitioner, but you're not going to be the IO practitioner. So what does that mean? So most of my graduates they would go to Johnson & Johnson, they would go to SC Johnson, they'd go to Papa John's, they go to ExxonMobil, they'd go to Amazon, PepsiCo, John Deere. A lot of pizza companies have IOs, which is funny to me. Pizza Hut, Domino's, but any large corporation, and you're gonna realize that there are about, and there's a wide range here, but I think John Deere has 3 IOs. I think Disney has 20 IOs. I think Amazon has freaking 250 IOs that don't talk to each other. They're all in different. I have friends in Amazon, and I'm like, hey, do you know this person? They're like, no clue who they are. I'm like, but you're both IO. They're like, yeah, but we pretty much work in a different company within Amazon. PepsiCo. So PepsiCo used to be the gold standard. I don't know if used to be is true. I think they might still be. They started with about 50 to 60 IOs in their HR department, and they have sent so many people out of. PepsiCo is like, if you work there and they send you out, you become a VP of HR, a director of a future CHRO. Like that is the gold standard. That has been the gold standard for a long time. Alan Church, I don't know if you know that name, but he's been someone that was in the science practitioner, both lanes, that really did a lot of good work there. So you would, to get into one of those jobs, And I mentioned all the corporate ones. So you can also go into Booz Allen Hamilton, you can go to Korn Ferry, you can go to Deloitte, you can go to Ernst and Young, you can do all those external ones as well. Doing those types of works and those types of interventions, you have to have experience in which you've worked with clients to solve talent related problems. So have you fixed a performance management system? Have you worked on a leadership competency model? Have you career pathed? Have you created a succession plan? Have you developed a comp model and then hired off that comp model, developed a selection system? All those are kind of like strategic HR intervention type things. You can always get hired. And so we have like verticals in our field. So like assessments would be a vertical. So you could go all the way up assessments, analytics, you could go all the way up analytics. Um, then you have all the functions within HR. You have a business partner, you have, director, VP of a specific function like talent management, talent development, leadership development. You can move around a lot as well. So it really depends what your North Star is. I just got acquainted with a colleague. She taught in my program. She just got promoted to VP of Global Talent Management at SC Johnson. She's one step away. She started at PepsiCo. She's like one step away from being a CHRO. That's always her North Star. It always was. It's always what she wanted to do. So she bounced around a lot. She was a business partner, and then she worked in learning and development, and then she did training, and then she jumped into talent management. So she moved around a lot because she knew that's what she wanted to do. You don't have to do that. You can just take your vertical all the way up. The question, though, you ask yourself is if you are in a corporate environment and you're good, your promotion cycle is about 16 to 24 months. So if you get promoted 5 to 7 times and that takes you 10 to 15 years, that's probably going to sit you close to the top of that vertical. And then obviously I don't know how old you are, but if you feel like in your mid 30s or your mid 40s or young 30s or wherever, you're like, wow, I'm at the top and I'm kind of done. Like, I don't know, I'm going to sit in this position for the next 30, 40 years. You might not want to do that. So instead of taking vertical, you're going to kind of jump around and kind of go around the merry-go-round so that you can get all the experience to then move into these different positions as you climb to have more options in the future. So the two questions I heard right off the bat were you kind of have to get that IO framework, and then you have to get some experience working with clients on those specific projects. Because in any interview that you're going to get a job, when you read the tasks and the competencies and the description, you have to be assertive to say, oh, I see that you're in this line of business. I've worked in this line of business. I know what your goals are. I know how to support the business. You got to be able to communicate that and then say, and I've done these sorts of things for these clients, and this is the success that I've shown. So typically that's through getting some sort of internship or working, on your own to land some client to serve some success. What we do in our program is we actually work with our HR department, and we do strategic HR interventions for our HR department. So our students get client related they get experience doing all this with a mentor, and then they get in the end of their program, their applied project, they have to do it on their own. So by the time they're done, I was very strategic about having them be able to tell a future employer, yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that. Yeah, I've done that. This is how I did it. This is what we found. This is the success that we found. So that would be, I think that's the overall objective of someone in IO going, if you're not going academics, is to have diagnostic capability, work with companies to figure out their org group individual related issues, have theory to solve, and then have some experience and have some credibility around that you can already do that. I think one of the things that students try to say in the interview, which is, I think it's a good, humble thing. It's like, hey, I'm hungry. I have all these great soft skill attributes. I learn quick. I do all these things. And I want this to be a learning opportunity. A lot of corporations are like, well, we need to know that you can do it now. We don't we'll give you some training, but we want to know that you have some evidence already that you've done these things. So a big part of coming to the table on your part to be ready for this is to have some client work, to have some client success, to say, I have already done these things, and this is why I think I can do it for you. You have to be your best advocate, and you have to say, hey, I'm aligned with your company. I believe in what you're doing. What you're doing, I've done, and I want to do it for you. That's pretty compelling. Pretty compelling sell. So you've really got to do your research and homework to know, and it's early on. I mentioned a lot of different. I've just said a lot of different things. So I'm sure reeling through your mind is, well, how do I know if I want to do, take the assessment vertical or the analytics vertical, or how do I know if I want to do multiple things to give myself more options down the future? I think you have to understand the different lanes, and you have to understand, is that something that you see yourself doing a lot? We are a technical people field. So I think a lot of people get into our field because they're interested in business and people. I believe you have to be good with people. That is a very important thing. We have a class in our program, org consulting, where it's identifying your ability to connect with different people. What are your hangups? What are some things that might create distance? What are some barriers to actual relationship that might be identified? And that comes out a lot in the group work. They do some self-reflection, and then we just see it in the group work. There's a lot of barriers to connection and relationship and in working smoothly. But you have to have some technical acumen. You have to. You have to be able to sort through data. You have to know. You have to have an assessment background. You have to have research design, or you have to be an interventionist, someone that can actually help solve problems. I would say those are the four biggest categories: research design, stats, um, scales, surveys, and intervention work. So you kind of have to find yourself, if you want to land somewhere, and then you want to, in one of those lanes, you want to get some experience and some credibility in those lanes to say, hey, I can do this and I'm good at it. And each lane's a little different. Assessments is kind of that technical work within surveys and understanding constructs. Research design is understanding how to solve problems, really how to diagnose, how are we going to answer this question. Stats is manipulating and moving data around and presenting data. And the intervention work, which I think a lot of people like, or they think they like, is where you have those base competencies in those three things I mentioned, and then you're actually trying to solve, improve a performance management system, career path, succession plan, create a leadership development competency, coach an individual leader, all those different things. Work on selection systems. Just so you know, I never mentioned recruiting because I think recruiting is somewhat outside of IO. I think IO, obviously there's a link to recruiting, but IO to me doesn't include that. I think it's selection would be an IO, assessment, talent management, talent development. Not to say you can't go into recruiting if you're an IO. I just think that's not a master's or PhD route you have to do. I know a lot of my bachelor students gone into recruiting, executive recruiting, things like that. So just to kind of define that. I think I saw a question here.
Yes. Yeah. So Kate, it says the question is, are there pathways to get into the corporate side without starting on the internship level? A lot of consulting firms require previous experience in another prestigious firm, but the entry-level positions would be a huge step down for me professionally, since I already have over 20 years of work experience outside of the IO field. And Ben, I'm really curious about this one because I feel like that's kind of my experience as well. I have about eight to 9 years in counseling background. And so how do we use that background? How do we use the skills that we already have in a whole different career that we've already developed and spent all this time in, and then bring that over to make us unique and make us stand out? So what do you think about that?
That's really good. So like I mentioned, if you want to get into the corporate world, you've got to start to pinpoint what company you want to work for and who are those IO people at that company that you need to get to know. I mean, it's as simple as that, because those are the ones that hire other IOs. So my friend is Victoria Smoke. She's at SC Johnson. She just hired a master's level student to run her engagement survey data, and they're global. So they're in 9 to 10 countries. And this person she just hired runs the 360-degree feedback program and collects all engagement data. And like I said, they start entry level. So they're running this program that Victoria has designed, but 2, 3 promotions, they'll be the one doing the setting the IO, the program. So it's really, if you want a corporate job with a specific company, you have to know who those IOs are, and you have to meet them, and you have to get exposure to them, and you got to showcase your skill set to them for them to want to bring you on. It becomes a little, I think that's a nice mental approach, because I'm familiar with the openings and LinkedIn now, getting into this job space. You look at how many people apply and you just pass out. Or you're like, yeah, there's 150 applied, but they have an insight. And this is true. This is very true. Referrals win the day. They always win the day. So if you're applying blind, you're applying against someone that's been referred by a high performer or by a boss or by a VP, you're already disadvantaged to that person. So referrals, you got to get referrals. How do you get referrals? Well, you got to know people and know people within the company, and you've got to showcase. So that's what's hard. I mean, I have these conversations with my students all the time. It's like, really what they want me to do is say, hey, Ben, I paid you, $30,000. I'll call you on, February 27th, and I expect to get a call from Domino's that they hire me as an entry-level talent manager. I said, well, I wish I could do that, but that's not how, I mean, I don't even know if I wish you could do that, because you have to find what company you want to work for, and you have to do the work. I can give, I can meet all these people and start to give referrals, which is the best thing I could do. That's the best thing the way I could help you. Say, hey, I got this great student. I know the hiring manager. You should hire them. Um, but that's what you have to do on your own. You've got to figure out, and you want to do that. I think when you're ready for a job, if you just looked on job boards or LinkedIn and just kind of applied to anything that you found, I don't think you're going to win that way. I don't think you're going to find that company that's going to make you happy. I don't think, everyone looks at the description, looks right at the salary if you're in a state that makes them post, and then it's like, oh, I want to apply there. But it's like, you should know a lot more about the company than that. You should ask some hard questions. I equip my students, I try to be like, yeah, I don't want you to be passive in this. I don't want you to be, I want you to be on offense. I want you to ask them some difficult questions to make sure that this is a good fit for you. That they're going to treat you right. I want you to ask about the promotion cycle. I want you to ask about what's the turnover rate in this job in the last 5 years. I want you to try to get some signals. Is this a healthy culture or not? If it's not, why you want that job? You're going to be looking for a new one in 6 months. So it's on you to really survey the landscape. And before, I'd like to meet with someone looking for a job that doesn't even know what jobs are out there, in a sense. It's like, hey, here's what I'm looking to do. I'm looking for, when these companies have an opening, is where I want to go. I had a friend when I was at Hofstra, and he was in the business school, and I'd go do my registration. He'd go sit down with me, and he was looking at American Express, and he said, Ben, I'm going to work at American Express. And I said, what are you talking about? You haven't even had an interview. What do you mean you're going to work at American Express? I said, what's your backup? He said, I don't have one. He said, I'm going to work at American Express. And I said, I kind of laughed at him. I'm like, okay, I'll believe you when I see it. And he worked at American Express. And the way he did it was, anytime American Express had an interview, at any time they had group meetings, anytime they had a conference, anytime they had here's who we are, he'd go to it. And he started to become known. And they had an infomercial thing where they had 9 people from American Express talk about it. And he went and he asked questions. He presented who he was. And the 9th person at that panel said, hey, Steve, come here. He said, I want you to apply for this job. And Steve got that job. And Steve's his name's Steve Medard. He I mean, he's killing it. He's in New York City. I think he's moved to another company now. So that's kind of the process that I found to be successful is you have to laser in on what vertical you want to do, what company you want to work at, what IOs are at that company, and how do you get exposure to those IOs. So it takes work, you know. You're not going to land on a job, in my view, you're not going to be land a job you're happy with by, being panicked to get money, to look on LinkedIn, to look at site, to look at these jobs and just apply to what's out there. Yeah, it's not you're not gonna that won't fulfill you long term. I've seen too many of that.
Thank you for that. Another question was, what are some tools or communities where we can get to know the IOs in those positions? And PsyOp is one. There is SEBOC, which is we're doing this. They have a work cookie podcast. They have all kinds of events you can join, and as a student and as a professional as well. Um, and so, can you answer that tools and communities question and also tell us a little bit about networking because it can feel daunting sometimes. You have all this, education and background and whatnot, but how do you feel about networking? There's always an interesting conversation around that because there's always different intentions, there's a different purpose. So tell us about that.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I had a student, an undergrad. I feel like I'm like an old timer now. How many students I've had? I've taught for 10 years, which is crazy to me. But I had a student that reached out to 6 to 8 people on LinkedIn every single day. Every single day. She just had a quota for herself. I'm going to reach out to 8 new people every day. And when it was time to get an internship, she was offered six different internships. She pick and choose which one she wanted. So she just made it. I think when I think of networking, the one word that comes to my mind is intentional. You're intentional about it. It's not you look through LinkedIn, you look at people and you're like, oh man, I got to meet that person. I got to talk to that person. Well, you might not talk to that person, but there might be like 15 people like that person that you could talk to. So go talk to them. Um, it takes anything that you get return value on. So like Shiba Inu, right? That I did not get. When Robinhood came out, I put like $1,500 in Shiba. I would have been a millionaire if I kept it in, but I'm a dummy and I pulled it out. Um, that's kind of the model with networking is you just have to keep putting in and not seeing any gains from it in the short term, but you will see it in the long term. And it's that 7 degrees of separation thing that the person you add, it might not be that person. It might be someone they know that you have a spark with. And you only need one spark. You only need one conversation to change your life. And there's millions of people on LinkedIn, millions. I mean, maybe hundreds of millions. I don't know if that's accurate, but there's a lot of people. You have a lot of chances to find a spark. So, and people are in different stages of their career. That's what I found. There's different receptivity levels to networking based on where you're at. So when you get out of college and you're getting your first 5 years, you're hungry, right? You're climbing the ladder. You're really out there. Those people might not be as good. There's some that are, but those people they're trying to still network. They're still trying to impress people. They're really trying to climb. Then you got people in the 10 years that are now kind of leveling, surfacing leadership roles, maybe their first leadership role. That's a whole, they're changing careers really. When you go from high performer individually to leader, that's a whole different thing. So there's a lot of insecurity, anxiety. They're really trying to figure out that whole next step in their life. So that could be challenging. Then once you get over that hump where you're in a leadership level or you've been doing it a little bit now, you've kind of got it under control. Now you've got a sweet person to talk to because now they've got 15 years experience. They've been where you've been. They've interned, they've gotten a job, they've climbed it, they've gotten to leadership. They're in their third leadership position now. Those people are awesome. I mean, that's a stereotype, but a lot of the time they're ready to give back and to talk to you and kind of bend over backwards for you. That's what I've found at least. So reaching out you really want to look at level, and it's hard to know what, what stage of career a person's in. You can look at their LinkedIn and see level jobs, you never know. So just know that receptivity to your request has a lot to do with where they're at in their career. And so don't be offended if, like I said, if they're in that first or second group, they're climbing hard, or they're in that first leadership role, they might not be as interested. But people that are past that, like, I'll give you a prime example. So Victoria talked about, she fits that third bucket. She's been in a couple leadership roles. She just got promoted. So she's like 36 years old, and she's one step away from the top of where she could go. I mean, she's an absolute rock star. Well, she hit a lull with COVID in which she didn't get promoted on her regular 16 to 24 month cycle, which I learned recently was a thing. I'm an academic, so I never get promoted. My promotion cycle's like 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So I'm like, wait, you're telling me you get a pay bump like, if you miss the 24 mark, like, you're pissed? She was like, yeah. I'm like, wow, that's crazy to me. Um, but she kind of got in a lull for a while, and so I reached out to her, and she's a fellow. She's a Christian. Has a faith journey in her life. She wanted to help out with my university. I'm telling you, when I've never had someone give back like she gave back. I mean, she probably gave me 125 hours I didn't pay her for, in which she designed curriculum and applied projects and all this stuff. And then she got promoted, and now she's done with the program. So, but her investment was absolutely invaluable. I would not have a shot at this journey that I'm on without her. So that's just a story, it's an anecdote to let you know that when you reach out to people, there may not be some receptivity back or this eagerness to really talk to you and get you where you're going. It's probably a career path thing. It's probably a part of their career journey that they're on.
I like that. I think when I was getting close to my graduation date, I realized that I should have been looking for internships and doing informational interviews. And again, I'm a first generation, so I was just trying to figure it out as I went. And graduation to me was like, okay, I made it. Like, there was no idea that I needed to still do more, right? And on top of that, I mean, I've already had a pretty good counseling background and experience in career. And I mean, as far as that goes, I think I would be at a pretty good place if I wanted to stay there, right? So I think it's important to really get out of that comfort zone. And I think some of those informational interviews were probably the thing that really like just jump forward everything that I've done up until right now. And then it goes back to what you were saying, like we got to be very intentional, and where do we want to go, what do we want to do, and how do we want to get there. And what I find is the more I talk to different people, they have had all kinds of different paths, right? They've done all kinds of different things. And when you see that, you don't, I personally didn't feel as bad, like, okay, so this, I've done all these 5 things, and now I can definitely pivot and use that to do this one thing in IO. So that, thank you for that, because it does take a little bit of getting out of that comfort zone and reaching out and making those meaningful connections, not just trying to gain something from someone, but really just understanding their journey, what they've done, asking the right questions, and like you said, making yourself visible, because that's a huge one.
100%. And honestly, I think there was a question, I don't know if I missed, like, and how do you network and how do you gain skills if you don't do internships? Like, we're IOs, right? So every description, hopefully, a job is a good job description with competencies, with tasks, with things like that. So if you can show that you are able to complete those tasks, it can be an unconventional. I think that's actually an add up these days. If you have a different path than other people, you stand out. If you can show that you fit the culture and values of a company and you can execute based on the requisites or the requirements of the job description, you have a very good chance of getting a job.
Mhm.
A very good chance. So, and you might have to be creative in how you get those, you meet those client, how you solve those client problems. You can start your own consulting firm. You can, yeah, find an internship. You can work at a nonprofit and do some work. You can get a job and then inside that job, pivot and do some strategic HR stuff. I mean, there's loads of different ways. Not everyone has to take the same route.
Perfect. Brian Lewis says, I'm a first year in my program. I'm a first year in my program and I'm still trying to understand whether I want to go to applied or academic. Why did you decide to go into academia after being in practice? And what advice do you have to help me make that decision?
Well, it's I didn't know I was going to get that question. That's great. Everyone wants to go be a corporate practitioner. Um, yeah, so I it's funny, but I kind of mentioned it in my opening. When I was in sixth grade, I wrote that I was either going to be a college professor or make the MBA. And I wish I could say both happened, but only one did. Um, and for me, I'm a relational person. I'm into sports, so the Washington Commanders head coach just got hired, and they asked him why he took the job, and his quote literally like made my life made sense after he said it. He said, "I like to do hard shit with good people." I was like, "That's me." And being in academia is hard shit. It's a lot of broken processes, systems, a lot of misunderstanding about what we are and all that. But I was an athlete, so I'm a group creature. I like to do things with people. I like to tackle hills with a group of people. So I thought getting to university would be that. I found that it's a little different than what I thought, but I really get connection with my students. If I'm a people first person, if you look at like technical aptitude and relational aptitude, and you kind of that leadership domain, right? I would definitely be someone that tilts more to the relational aptitude. Um, I love to teach. I love to see the light bulb. I love opportunities like this where I get to share my experience with you all about kind of leveraging this field to really change organizations. How do you do that? How do you onboard? How do you get on path? So that makes sense for me. It's a very, very high quality of life. It's a very flexible life. Um, I think when you get, everyone has a different way of thinking about this, but when you think about your identity, I'm religious, so my identity comes from my faith, and then who I am. There's different ways I express myself. So in my vocation, I express myself as an IO psychologist. But I think a lot of people take that vocation box and they blow it up and they crowd out other expressions of themselves. And they have to be happy in that expression or they're miserable. And I don't like that. I fit my vocation as an expression of my life, but I'm a dad, and that's a huge expression of my life that my job needs to complement that for me personally. So I like to travel. I like to hang out with people. Like I like to be involved in stuff outside of work. So that's all what drew me to academics. I drop my kid off, I pick him up. We play baseball together. We jump on the trampoline. I'm sorry, I'm suffering for y'all. I live in, close to San Clemente, so I go to the beach most of the year. You can hate me for that. It's fine. Um, I pay for it, I'll tell you that. But um, it's that's how I see myself. I have multiple levels and expressions to myself. I don't see myself as just a worker. Um, I feel like when you get sucked into that maybe corporate lifestyle, that can take up a larger chunk of who you are and how you express yourself. So academics gives time for multiple ways, and it allows for you to do multiple things and not be bound to, strapped to your job all the time. So that's a big one for me.
Awesome. We have another question. Cam Dunson said, are online PhDs marketable to academic positions? I thought not, but my chair says I should think about academia.
Yeah, that is a great question. So PhD in the workplace is a very interesting, I'll just say it's very complex in a way, because when you talked about the verticals that I talked about, the assessment and analytics vertical, you definitely want to have your doctorate because those are very technical lanes where you need a PhD level of knowledge for those things. When you get on the intervention side, it would be beneficial to you from a title perspective to have a doctorate if you're sitting at, global talent director, global talent management, global leadership development. Most of these companies are global now. So, sitting there with your name, Ben Wood, PhD, Victoria Smoke, PhD, Ben Granger, PhD, that gives you an advantage. I will say that. Um, it depends though. I mean, my friend Chris Rosette is at the top of Amazon. He is the head of analytics for North America, and he has his master's degree. Um, that's a big deal. He's a smart dude. Um, so it's unfortunately, I think it does become a title thing. The PhD really becomes like a title leverage thing. And it may matter in some positions, like if you're a final candidate for CHR position, you have a PhD, they don't, that could matter. VP could matter, especially the vertical. The vertical really matters. Assessments and analytics definitely would probably want to get a PhD if you're going to go high in corporate, the vertical ladder. But if you're working talent management, leadership dev, all that stuff, and you continue to get promoted, it doesn't hurt to have a PhD. It does not hurt you. I don't think it's essential, but it doesn't hurt you. Nachopia Nkwama, who works with me, she is getting her PhD from Chicago's School Online. She runs leadership development for them. I think she has plans of, hopefully being in leadership at a director or VP level at some point. And I would assume she thinks it's important to get her doctorate. Um, it's not a crossover though. What you learn in your PhD does not help you. It does not help you a lot in corporate. It's it's really a title thing in my opinion. I got my PhD and everything I learned was like, whoa, this doesn't help. Helps with research, but it doesn't help with understanding how to fix corporate problems. So now it's a little blurry of an answer, but it is a little complex to know how the PhD helps you. It definitely helps you in the higher ranks, the longer you're in your career, moving up into those kind of final leadership positions you would have. Early on, you don't need it for sure. Yep.
I guess my question was more of, am I marketable to academia with an online PhD?
Oh, I see. Sorry.
Because I don't have an in-person PhD.
Yeah.
I had kind of given up on the academic dream.
Yeah.
But my chair says not. And I'm saying, I don't know.
So I just saw someone get hired at a pretty prestigious IO program from Capella University Online. It's definitely a little more rare than having an in-person from Hofstra, Bowling Green, Michigan State. The research dissertation progress is definitely, I'm on one. I do dissertations online. It's different than when we had to do them in person. I mean, mine took 17 months to complete. It was really, really hard. Not saying that online's not, it's just a little different. I think the online appeal is definitely teaching online. I think you can teach in those online programs with a PhD really well. I think moving into a residential one, if you're a finalist and they have a top 15 or 20 PhD from South Florida, Central Florida, Michigan State, Bowling Green, something like that, Minnesota, that could be hard.
Thank you, Cam, for that clarification. And since we do have a couple minutes left, I wanted to ask, what is one thing you'd recommend everyone on this meeting today to do? What is an actionable step that we can take from today? And I know that's a little bit of a loaded question, but I think it's always good to have something afterwards to say, okay, that if anything, this is the one thing I'm going to do for myself. So what do you think that would be?
Thank you. First of all, I'd like to say thank you, Gabby, for having me here. Thanks for being a part of SEBOC. I have been someone that's kind of been disillusioned by PSYOP a little bit. I've fallen off a little bit of the hard science. I go to those conferences and I'm like, why do I keep going to this? Honestly. I think I used to, I mean, don't tell anyone this, but I used to get my university to pay me to go and I'd go watch baseball the whole weekend. I don't know if I even went to a conference. You're not missing it if you miss one of those seminars. I mean, I sat in one and I was just like staring at the wall, like, what's the wall's more interesting than what you're saying. Come on. So I mean, know your identity. Like I would say probably most of us are practitioners at heart. And so if you're a practitioner at heart, you're not going academic, learn what that means. And hopefully you can, if you want to go back to this recording, I think I shared a lot about what that looks like, what our identity is. So I would kind of assess yourself. Action step, I would say, is IO based on how I described it? Do you see yourself like that? Is that your professional vocational identity? And then how can you get better at that? How can you start to practice that? So how can you start to diagnose and solve problems and get some true intervention? How can you apply theory and work on interventions to solve problems on the performance side and the leadership side? So really, I would say leveraging, first of all, figuring out maybe a thought experiment. What do I think I would like? Like what issue with an organization do I really want to help them on? I personally think performance management is the most important piece of any HR function because you hire employees and hopefully you're hiring good ones, right? You've hired top talent off the bat. And now it's ball game. Did you meet their expectations? Are they doing what they were hired to do? Are they going to get promoted in 18 months? How are you measuring their performance? How do you know who should get promoted, who should get training, and who should be let go? You know that? So to me, that's really fascinating. I think a great function to be on. Leadership dev is incredible. You help figure out what does leadership mean. There's a million different definitions of leadership. More than a million. It's probably 10 million. Probably more than 10 million. But there's probably a conception coming as we're talking about. There's going to be a new leadership that's introduced tomorrow. But you get to help organizations be like, what do you want our leaders to be? What do we want them? How do we want them to influence? I just saw that comment. Yeah. So you gotta do a little diagnostics for yourself. What lane, what vertical do you want to go up? How do you meet those people that can help you get that experience? How do you talk about that? How do you do that? That would be my homework, is figuring out your IO specific identity and then meeting people in that identity and then getting some experience doing some of those things. You want to have a superpower. You want to have I can do this. I am good at doing this. I'm good at solving these types of people's problems. I have a tool. I have a skill set at doing that. What is that for you? What problem do you want to solve for who? And when you figure that out, go crazy. Go meet people that solve that problem for those people, and then get opportunities to get experience to do that yourself. And again, you are a unique, special, awesome person that is like no other person on this planet. And you don't have to replicate someone else's life. I don't think you should. I think you should pick out a path that suits you, that suits all the things about you. And you don't have to covet someone else's path. You can do your own thing. So I hope that makes sense.
Thank you. That does. It made me kind of think of what you said earlier. You always knew you were going to be in academia. I've always known research. When I started my undergrad, I had no clue what research was. I did my associates and I heard the word and I was like, oh, that sounds cool. And as I've really immersed myself in different fields, different jobs, just reading the research for school, then I was like, oh, this is the kind of stuff. And then now you kind of dive into, what does that look like for me? Do I really want to start at the computer for however amount of time? Right now, that's what my job is, research and data analysis. And then I'm finding like, oh, maybe I do want to do this. And definitely it's research and data analysis in higher education. So maybe not higher education, maybe I'll try something later down the road. But I think when we get into this field, we have like an innate call. Like there's something we know we want. We may not know what it looks like. We may not know what the job title is, if there's even a job title today for what we want to do, but I'm pretty sure there will be. 5 years from now, this field is expanding rapidly, and there's a lot of really exciting things happening in the field. So I think the more innovative, the more authentic and confident you are in that identity that Ben is talking about, I think the more likely you will be able to find that path, which you will eventually. We all do. So Ben, thank you so much for sharing your information. I'm going to honor everybody's time and cut this, just right at the hour. And if any of you have any additional questions, just reach out in LinkedIn. I put the SEBOC website on there as well if you want to check out some of their information that they have and some of the groups. Please do that. This group is going to be happening bi-weekly. So we will be having speakers every group or every virtual meetup, whatever we call this, to make sure that you guys are getting that information. So please get your questions answered, email me or reach out on LinkedIn, and have a lovely evening, night, whatever it is in your time. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good one.